So, marching right along, you said that there's a qualitative difference between consciousness and non-consciousness, between consciousness and matter. And I would agree again, just like consciousness is about feeling, that means what we normally consider matter to be unfeeling, insentient, dumb, blind, deaf, stupid uh, stuff, mechanism, is qualitatively different than what we normally consider consciousness to be, which is sentience, feeling, emotion, awareness, sensation. Um, and my point is that because of this qualitative difference and distinction, we can't just say that a certain number of complexifications of matter, a certain number of components, a certain number of neurons, a certain quantity of physical parts can somehow then create a different quality. Quantity cannot just leap over into being a quality without a miracle. And, like I said, I'm trying to be as honest as I can about this. If you can tell me how the dead stuff, the pieces that just mechanically, algorithmically crunch their thing, like gear work, becomes sentient, becomes capable of feeling pain and pleasure, experiencing, beauty and all the sensations that consciousness allows for. If you can explain to me how that works, you know, I'll be convinced if it's reasonable and logical. But if we're just going to say it happened, then I'm not convinced. But that consciousness is here, that it did happen, so to speak, is obvious, and you're right that the origin is not as important as acknowledging its existence, because some extreme materialists like Patricia and Paul Churchland, with their eliminative materialism approach to neuroscience, as far as they're concerned, consciousness doesn't exist. It's an illusion that we talk about as though it were real, but we're basically just, it's like a leftover of religion. And when we understand the brain better, we won't talk about love and beauty and the color red. We'll talk about the amygdala and the frontal cortex and the composition of the neurochemical physical brain, rather than the qualities of what it is to be aware, because that stuff isn't real. It's folk psychology. So certainly we would agree that that is crazy, I think, right? And we should acknowledge consciousness is real. Suffering matters, as you're always saying. Um, so yeah, but once we've established that consciousness exists, the origin becomes the next question. How did it get here? Or did it have to get here? Was it always here? Um, Now, you're misunderstanding what panexperientialism implies, because you said, if we just cut off our arm, that it would be conscious. That you think that's apparently what I was saying. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not talking about some form of pantheism where everything is God or everything is mind, and it's all an amorphous blob of interconnected, indistinguishable magic, and you can't point out how anything works and make any distinctions. I'm not saying that. We can make distinctions, and we need to, because you seem to think that a piece or a part is the same as what I was calling a unity, or an autopoietic system, or a holon. And all these things mean is, I'll give an example of a rock. It's made up of molecules. Those molecules are unities. They have a sense of autonomy, not free will. There's still autonomy in the context of a bunch of other molecules that they have to interact with. They don't have a choice about that. They can't control the other molecules, but they have autonomy. They are self-creating, which is all that autopoietic means. They are self-generating entities, unities, or holons, because they are whole in and of themselves, even while also being parts of a larger thing. Now, in the case of a rock, the larger thing is not a conscious entity. It's just an aggregate, a collection, or a heap of these smaller holons, or unities, or autopoietic molecules. Now, molecules that come together to form cells whether prokaryotic or eukaryotic, any kind of cell, bacterium, paramycium, whatever, that is a new unity. That is a new autopoietic system that has a higher or deeper or more complex type of consciousness than the molecule had, a new type of autonomy, in a sense, more autonomy. And then when the cell cooperates with other cells and becomes a multicellular organism, an animal, a human being, with a nervous system, consciousness is deepening and deepening, becoming more complex, more capable of expressing individuality and autonomy and making more decisions on the inside about how to respond to its context. And so it's not that everything is equally conscious and that atoms are, contemplating what they're going to do in their old age or anything. There's a definite development and evolution of consciousness, an increasing degree of freedom that continually emerges as more and more unities come together to form larger unities, and they sort of incorporate their own qualities, but also produce something new, a larger whole with new causal powers, new abilities. So, we have to make a distinction. It's not just that any little thing is conscious. There are, ways that we can break this down so that we can still do science. We can still investigate and describe and predict accurately, though not with certainty, because we're dealing with living creatures now. The universe is alive. Matter is alive. It's not just this mechanism. Science is no longer done based on the idea of mechanism. It can't, like I said in my last video, because it doesn't fit the data anymore. When we deal with biological systems and ecosystems, we can't look at them as linear input-output types of machines, because they're not like that. They're circular. They're self-creating. They're autocatalytic. They have metabolism. They have energy and mass continually flowing through them, information continually flowing through them, and in them and out of them too. I mean, human beings can do this. Like, what is this? How did this happen? This is just blind matter and motion. They learned how to write. I mean, I think that's absurd, and I'm not willing to become a theist or a creationist, but I think there are alternatives to extreme versions of materialism that aren't theistic and religious and dogmatic, but in fact are in line with the facts of our experience pretty well, actually, if you would just consider the implications of what I'm saying and not, convert it into some straw man so you can reject it because it's radically different than what you happen to think. So, instead of thinking of consciousness as specific to structures in the brain, as, nothing but the arrangement of some parts, this is what I was criticizing about when Nick was mentioning representationalism, because that's basically what you're suggesting, that all that matters is the way that the parts or the representations in the brain match up with one another, and they're like gears, and they just crunch based on the programming that comes in from the world. It's more than the parts, because if there's consciousness, it's more than just the machine. Otherwise, the machine could just do its thing without the consciousness. Consciousness never would have evolved. The representations, if such things exist, brain structures where consciousness happens, it's not just the structure that is conscious or that is part of the activity of being a conscious being. It's what that feels like, what that neural pattern feels like, what it is like to be that, not just the shape or the representation or the part, not the outside of this thing that we can look at. If a person eats some chocolate and they taste the chocolate, and they have their brain opened up, and the neuroscience or the neurosurgeon is up there playing around, if he wanted to taste that person's own sensation of the chocolate, he couldn't lick their brain and do it. He couldn't do it in any way, because somehow that experience is internal to the neurons, and I don't think you can explain that based on it just being a mechanism composed of blind, stupid parts, unless you can, and I'd like you to try, because I don't know how it's done.